Good evening. It's July 5th, 2013. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I'd like to welcome all of you viewing this webcast to the most recent in our series of Friday evening live broadcasts featuring Mr. Lyndon Larouche. Tonight, I am joined in the studio by Leandra Bernstein and Dennis Mason, who will be posing questions for Mr. Larouche to respond to. This is the regular format in which we engage in these Friday night broadcasts. However, tonight, Mr. Larouche has requested that we begin with a very significant question that has come in from institutional circles inside Washington, D.C. So to pose this first question on the breaking situation currently in Egypt, I'd like to ask Dennis Mason to come to the podium.
Okay. What I'd like to do before posing the question directly is give a little bit of background. If people remember that the original protests in Egypt in 2011 were sparked largely by economic conditions. The questions of food, the availability of wheat, and also a lot of unemployment amongst the youth. Now, this was actually referred to in some of the statements that have been coming out since the fall of the Morsi government in Egypt. The gentleman who has taken over the head of the High Constitutional Court in Egypt referenced the glorious 2011 revolution and said that he reiterated in his statement that genuine free presidential and parliamentary elections that reflect the true will of the people are the only gateway to a free, democratic, and just future. And then shortly after, the National Salvation Front issued a statement where they said, we would like to confirm that what Egypt is witnessing is not a military coup by any standards. It was a necessary decision that the armed forces leadership took to protect democracy, maintain the country's unity and integrity, restore stability, and get back on track toward achieving the goals of the January 25th revolution. We believe that the joint decisions reached in the meeting yesterday between the armed forces and several national forces and witnessed by respected spiritual figures such as the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar and the Coptic Pope. Those decisions further confirm that the armed forces have no intention to intervene in politics. Now, along with this, there has also been communication between the head of the Egyptian Armed Services and our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey. And in an interview on that, Dempsey had the following to say. He said that they're trying to help them find their way in a new system. He said the armed forces ran the country for several decades, and they were transitioning themselves into their role in a democracy. Now, I'm not in the know about exactly what they're going to do. My conversations with them have been principally about, I wanted to get their assurance that they would protect our U.S. citizens, and they will. I wanted to encourage them to protect all the Egyptian people and not take sides on any particular issue, and they will. And to ensure that they are part of a resolution in this, but in their proper role as a military, which is to ensure stability, but not to try to influence the outcome. Now, as far as the protests themselves, it's quite significant that Barack Obama was actually a subject of a lot of the signage and banners during the protest. You had certain signs. One read, "Obama supports terrorism." Another, "Wake up, America. Obama backs up the fascist regime in Egypt." Another one said, "Obama, your bitch is our dictator." So the sights were leveled directly at Obama in terms of the ferment in the Egyptian people. So these are some of the context. Also in the background, because it's not a simple situation in Egypt. You also had the United Nations, a panel of experts put out a report showing that you have a lot of guns that were running from Libya into Egypt. And then also on the 26th of June, there was an intelligence document released by Libyan intelligence pointing out that the Muslim Brotherhood, including President Morsi, may have been involved in the 9/11 attacks at Benghazi in September of 2012. So With this as a background, I'm going to go ahead and read directly the question from the institutional contact. They say, Mr. LaRouche, we would like your comment and assessment on the events that have taken place this week in Egypt. While critics of the action taken by the Egyptian military have branded it as a military coup, it cannot be denied that an estimated 10 million Egyptians turned out for peaceful protests on June 30th, demanding the ouster of the Morsi government. It would appear that the failure of the Muslim Brotherhood-led Morsi government to deal with desperate economic conditions, as well as their stubborn refusal to create a larger governing coalition with opposition forces, led to the events of this week. Please give us your assessment of these developments and their implications.
All is on a stage. These are not actions which are motivated by the immediate interaction of forces in Egypt. This is a global operation with global partisans orchestrating Egypt as a stage on which the performance is presented. But this is not the cause or origin of what's going on in Egypt. And you see, obviously, in the past couple of days, we've seen orchestration which can only be attributed to further outside manipulations. And we can assume that of course, Obama is very much involved in trying to manipulate the people on the stage as actors as such. And there are other forces that are doing the same kind of thing. So you cannot simply say, this is the problem, by looking at this in a naked sense. But you have to figure out who is doing what from behind the scenes, because that's what this thing is. Now, therefore, you cannot make a deductive assessment of what was going on in Egypt per se. You have to look at the larger stage. You have to look at what the issues are on the larger stage, behind the stage. And that's the only way to understand this. What happened was a successful, in the short term, staging was pulled. The U.S. military played a role together with the Egyptian military and others to try to pull something off which would be a peaceful solution to what was being done to try to create a crisis which would spread throughout the whole region. So therefore the peace was achieved. The people who spoke were at peace, largely at peace at least. What happened? Well, somebody else put a hand in and changed everything. So now, in the recent 2 days, the 48 hours, there's been a change in the situation because somebody orchestrated to create the effect of a change in the situation. The change in the situation did not occur in Egypt. It occurred in those who were pulling strings from outside into Egypt. And that's the way we have to look at this thing. Now, of course, Obama's a key factor. The British are a factor. Saudi Arabia is a major factor. You have other factors that are going on stage, independently of the stage itself. And you have all kinds of interventions. So the point is now is to realize that we cannot sit and hope, in any case, that we're going to achieve, as we did a few days ago, a success. But that success was not conclusive. Not because of the people on the stage, but the people who were maneuvering things from behind the stage, including Obama. Obama's in a very critical condition. He's losing the ability to control the situation more and more. His backers are finding it more difficult to control the situation behind him more and more. This thing can go in any number of directions. It can be very explosive. The factors here are all in a panic state. So that's the way we have to see it. We have to see this not as what is on stage is the reality. You're going to have to see from behind what's on stage. The reality you cannot see. You cannot see what is being done off stage. You may get some information, but it's not conclusive because it's always only partial. And there may be a dumb factor in there that you don't know about. But what you're getting now is the fact of the matter is, number one, the situation in Egypt continues to be unstable because of outside interventions, which we may know in part, but not necessarily in entirety. We do not know the number of kinds of interventions which are being made. We do not know what the Libyan effect is going to be on Egypt. We do not know in other parts of neighboring Africa. We don't know what's going on in the Middle East. We don't know what the schemes are behind this and that. Well, we are now batting flies, is what it essentially amounts to. And we have to understand the fact that we have not reached a point of stability in any sense. What was done in Egypt to pacify the situation was an accomplishment. It is a permanent contribution to whatever the outcome is, but it has not yet defined what the ultimate outcome will be. We have to be prepared for anything. We're in that kind of time. Don't panic. Don't take things for granted. Don't assume there's a control in sight. Don't assume there may not be even a thermonuclear war, which General Martin Dempsey and others have collaborated to try to prevent. And the major stabilizing factor in this region has been the role of Martin Dempsey and others who have been focusing specifically on the fact that you have an unstable stage on which the action is occurring. And you have to have a factor of behind the stage which is prepared to react to prevent a catastrophe from occurring from a new quarter and a new source. And that's where we are. If we had a president of the United States who is fit for anything, we could use the president of the United States very effectively to try to control the global situation of instability, which is all over the place. So we don't have that. We don't have that because we have a president who is useless, worse than useless. And that Martin Dempsey and company are people who've come in to take the place of what the President of the United States should have been committed to do, to say, we, the United States, have the leading responsibility on the planet to try to create stability when people are trying to create instability throughout the planet. And as long as Obama remains president, we're always going to have an absolute uncertainty of what might or might not happen on any given day in any part of the world. And that's the point. The fact is, if you're smart, your conclusion is, get Obama out of office. The grounds for removing him from office are more than abundantly clear. If the United States is going to do anything good beyond what Dempsey and some other people have done, you're going to have to get Obama out of office first.
All right, well, I would like to address one of the currents of instability at play on stage right now, and it's a faction who is committed to reducing the world population. It's something that we've addressed often on this program, and so this question is on the issue of environmentalism. And when we're talking about environmentalism, we're not talking about the environment, protecting the environment, using renewable fuels, carbon capping. What's being discussed is, in fact, population reduction. And what you put out as a challenge, or really marching orders, is to name the names and crush those who originated this policy of population reduction overall. We're out to destroy the green agenda, given what the alternative is. So I'd like to present you with a brief chronology of this faction this conspiracy, which is fully at play now. And it begins with the post-FDR shift, which was the FDR period was typified by the population boom, the baby boom, technology boom, especially the incarnation of nuclear power. But as Roosevelt left stage, you could say, Julian Huxley, the first president of UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, established the intention to repopularize something that had gone terribly out of fashion with Adolf Hitler, namely eugenics. He stated explicitly that any radical eugenic policy will be, for many years, politically and psychologically impossible, but the job of UNESCO under his leadership would be to make the impossible possible. He said, after setting up the Wildlife Conservation Special Committee, which was one of the seed crystals of the worldwide green movement, he said that the lowest strata are reproducing too fast. Therefore, they must not have too easy access to relief or hospital treatment, lest the removal of the last check on natural selection should make it too easy for children to be produced or survive. Long unemployment should be grounds for sterilization. Now, I'll just mention that the Bureau of Labor Statistics monthly report came out today, and in June, the long-term unemployment in the United States remained unchanged from May at 4.3 million people who have been out of work for 6 months or longer. I'm just stating a fact. So you have, from Julian Huxley, you have 1961, the creation of the World Wildlife Fund, launched by Prince Bernhard, Prince Philip, with the collaboration of another brother, Julian Huxley, who was a longtime leader in the eugenics movement and the president of the British Eugenics Society. And this apparatus began to fund the creation of worldwide environmental organizations. The World Wildlife Fund, the City of London, the largest cartels, Wall Street, and charitable foundations poured money into these environmentalist organizations, the Josiah Macy Foundation, Meadows and Forester, Club of Rome, Limits to Growth, Sierra Club, grants to numerous, almost uncountable green organizations to, in part, shut down nuclear power, promote environmentalism, and, as stated, promote eugenics. Now, this gets us into the 1970s, which we've discussed as the beginning of the Bush era, and we're not quite out of the Bushes yet. In the 70s, George Herbert Walker Bush chaired hearings on his task force on Earth resources and population. And before that committee, he brought two well-known eugenics professors and asked them to explain how high birth rates for African Americans were downbreeding our people. And that goes on. I mean, it goes on from into the role of Prescott Bush in financing the American arm of the British Eugenics Society. He was a treasurer, Prescott Bush, of the first national Planned Parenthood campaign. George H.W. Bush has also been well known as Rubbers Bush, but, well, you can find the documentation on that. So this continues when George Bush, the first President Bush, was a UN ambassador and head of the giving money to the United Nations Fund for Population Activities. When he functioned as a virtual ambassador to China, he said that new discoveries in birth control and sterilization would be a fine way for China to deal with all basically its problems. His counterpart in China said, actually, controlling population isn't so much a problem as ensuring sufficient grain production. So, and this goes on and on into the Obama administration. Obama goes to Copenhagen, 2009, endorses the event, an event sponsored almost entirely by groups under Prince Philip, the World Wildlife Fund and the Optimum Population Trust Fund, which is on the record calling for 5.5 billion fewer people on the planet Earth. Obama's advisors, as we've discussed before, John Holdren and Paul Ehrlich, are both on the record for mass population reduction and forced sterilization. And then most recently, Obama, on his trip to Africa, noted that the planet will boil over if the people of Africa are allowed a first world standard of living. If everyone's raising living standards to the point where everybody's got a car and everybody's got air conditioning and everybody has got a big house, well, the planet will boil over, says Obama. Now, I'd like you to address this, how it's affected policies, education, the mindset, even life expectancy, and how we defeat this ongoing conspiracy.
Okay. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to take all these things that you just went through as a roster and say it's all a fake. It has nothing to do with anything except it's a good brainwashing operation. It is not the subject. Look, see, the point is, none of these guys really apply physical science. They have no interest, no conception of physical science. Take a very simple thing about human beings and animals and things like that. Now, the human being is unique. Only the human being is capable of increasing the temperature of human activity. The only thing that is human is distinguished in primitive sources by the fact that there's a fire burning, or was burning, at the time this guy, who was not an animal but was human. How do you know that? Because he set fire for his fireplace. So therefore, and then you take the history of life, the history of human life. What's happening? The increase of the energy flux density per capita and per square kilometer is the factor that determines human progress and human survival. Huh? All this stuff about temperature, all this stuff about energies, all this stuff that's done by the green people, it is not only a lie, it's a complete change of subject from reality to fantasy. The only thing that's true about this is they want to kill people. Now, why do they want to kill people? This is what's called the oligarchical system, which has a deep root, but unfortunately most of the recorded history goes into in its background, goes into essentially some other factor. In other words, if mankind is concerned to increase the life expectancy and the conditions of life of human beings, you're going to increase the temperature at which you generate energy. Huh? That's the only thing that's true. Now, what happened is we came into the oligarchical system a long time ago, and it was in many parts of the planet. We know cases of this sort of thing. We don't know all the cases. We don't have the whole story because people weren't intelligent enough to be able to tell us that story. They weren't allowed to. But we had a division in population called the oligarchical system. A small group of people dominates and even eats other people. And the main thing is those who are doing the eating want to keep the other people stupid, so they can't know how to do things, to cheat them of the ability to use fire in an intelligent way, that sort of thing. Now that's what's going on here. The intention is not to solve a problem called overheating or something like that. The intention is to kill people. And to do more than kill people is to prevent them from knowing the kinds of skills which would secure them their survival. Why would anyone want to do a stupid thing like that? Because they don't want to be human beings. They wish to be monsters who keep a few human beings as captive for convenience and service of a small group. Because it's obvious to the oligarchical system that any time that mankind achieves an understanding of the implication of energy flux density, that mankind would easily overthrow all such oligarchical systems. So the point is that this is not a matter of a human interest. This is a matter of an inhuman history, an interest. That's what the problem is. So the first thing you got to do is that this is a fraud. The whole thing is a fraud. It was always a fraud, and it's a characteristic of what we know on this planet is the oligarchical system. The British Queen is an example of the oligarchical system. The Roman Empire was the oligarchical system. You had it in Greece. You've had it throughout the world. In India, for example, you have a policy. We have a population in India which is very intelligent, very advanced, culturally and otherwise advanced. But you have very poor people. Why are very poor people? Because they're kept that way for so-called caste reasons. It's another part of the oligarchical system. This goes on throughout the world. Africa is destroyed how? By the application of the oligarchical system, the oligarchical principle. Many people in Africa are not only eaten, but they're killed, maintained in a terrible condition of life. So the problem here is, what is the principle of humanity? And the human being is absolutely unique. It's the only form of life which we know which has the voluntary capability of increasing the energy flux density per capita and per square kilometer. Only mankind can do that. So therefore, the issue is, are you allowing mankind to become skilled or not? Now let's take the case of the green policy inside the United States. Well, the green policy is a fraud. Why are they using food and turning it into gasoline? Why? Because they want to destroy the society. They want to establish an oligarchical system which reduces the size of society through mass murderous means in order to maintain a system which is free of free people. They're going to allow some people, but they're going to kill people over a certain age, and that's easily done by starvation and other diseases and other kinds of means, which is precisely what this problem is. This is the oligarchical system. If you don't understand the history of the oligarchical system, you don't understand anything about what's going on in the United States and Europe and elsewhere today. It is not a problem. They are the problem. Anyone who is cutting the energy flux density per capita in society is a murderer. And there's no way you can justify that in science. So the fact that you have people who have no idea what science is, and most of the people out there today have absolutely no competent idea of what science means, even on an 18th century and 19th century level. No idea whatsoever. So the problem here is that people are induced to believe that the name of the issue is this or that, and it's nothing to do at all to do with it. The point is, you've got, if you do what I will do, even at my age, I'm limited, should we say, but even what I would do is to increase the energy flux density per capita of the population of the planet. How would I do that? By going to higher orders of energy flux density. And what I'm working on in particular involves a cultural problem, which I know, and which some other people who are predecessors of my existence also understood. And what I'm doing with some of our people in the basement is discussing precisely this thing. We have the potentiality of access to increasing again the energy flux density per capita of mankind. If we're going to deal with threats from outside Earth itself, we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to increase the energy flux density level of mankind's existence. Then we can deal with some of these problems. So if you want to improve mankind's life, you have to increase the energy flux density to the equivalent of a much higher temperature, but a temperature expressed in a form that mankind to deal with. And that's the problem here. You have one issue is used to cause you to submit to a certain kind of thing which will destroy you. That's the only purpose of the green policy. The purpose of the green policy is to kill people. Why do they want to kill people? Because they want to maintain a certain kind of society called the oligarchical society as the ruling society throughout the planet. So these guys are coming to eat you. It's not that they think that you're bothering them. They want to eat you. That is, they want to kill you and leave only a few stupid people who don't know what they're doing, who have almost no technology, who are simply the slaves of an oligarchical minority. That's what this is all about. There is no honor in any of this that's being done. No person who is following the green policy is an honorable person, because what they're committing is committing a deliberate, intentional fraud. Now, they may not know it's a fraud because they're too stupid to know it's a fraud. But don't believe in this energy flux, this energy question. It's a complete fraud. It has no truth in it whatsoever, and never did. What you're looking at is the ancient legend of the oligarchical system. The siege of Troy, for example, and things like that. And it's a question of some people who consider themselves what we call today oligarchs, wish to dominate the planet and not have trouble from weaklings, or people who are weak because they don't know how to do things. So they say, kill the people who know too much. Then we can control the survivors. And we want to go back to that kind of society, which is less, much less, than 1 billion people on this planet. That's what the issue is. Everything else about that discussion is a complete, utter fraud.
Okay, I'd like to ask you a follow-up to that question, and it comes from an assertion that one of your associates made, Michael Kirsch, in his video, The U.S. Legacy of Sovereign Credit, Part 1, said in his opening remarks that you must have a system of credit, of national credit, in order to have growth in the population and growth in terms of technology accessible, standard of living, and these sorts of issues. So if you do not have a system of credit, it means you will not have growth. And if you don't have an outlook which views the growth of your population in these terms as what it's aiming at, then you cannot have a system of credit somehow superimposed onto that outlook. So I'd like you to address that assertion and take this issue of population in terms of the issue of public credit?
Okay. Well, first of all, everything, is actually, if you look at it in the right way, it's much simpler than most people make it appear to be. That's a very important point here. First of all, on credit. Don't mystify credit. Now let's take the case of the American farmer operating under the policies of our founding discoverer. So what happens is you start with a process, you start with agriculture, growing food, essentially, right? Because the first thing mankind has to do is grow food, unless they want to eat their neighbor or something like that. So therefore, growing food, what happens? Now, you're a farmer, say in the 18th century. What do? Well, you grow food. What do? You develop the means to grow food on the basis of what you can get from the farmland, and what you can get from utensils and so forth, which you can use, which help you use farming. Okay, so you start there. Now, when you grow food, you have a period where you put the season starts, and you plant the stuff, and you cultivate the stuff, and so forth, and you harvest food. Now, you're in a society, and now you have a society which is going to progress. Why is it going to progress? Because it's going to develop things which are useful for food growers, in effect of food growers. So you will get machinery and other things which enable you as a farmer to do things which increase your productivity. Right? Now, but then you add to say, well, if I want to increase my productivity some more, I've got to go to my neighbor and work out a deal in technology where I'm producing things that are useful for the farm community, the food growing community. Forestry, all the whole works. So therefore you start, you plant a crop according to the season. You come to a point where the harvest time has come, say October, typical thing. Now you have, what do? You bring the food to market. So you sell the food that you sell to market. Simple. Now, what happens? But what do you pay? Well, the guy who is making the utensils and doing similar things like that in production outside of agriculture is going to pay for what you produce as food. Not only for himself, the farmer, but for the one who processes the product of the farmer's labor and so forth, or the supplies. So therefore, the inherent thing of a non-oligarchical society is that everybody contributes to everybody's profession. That's a necessary part of the whole business, and expands the number of professions available. This means that the result is that you now produce the food, that's a value, but you also are going to use that value to make machinery and so forth, which increases the productivity of society. So it's not a policy of you're going to do this or you're going to do that. It's a policy of how do you take the total effort of mankind to maintain and increase the productivity of life, of human life, and other forms of life. This means that the total amount that you're getting paid for in terms of the product includes this interaction. So it's not a mystery that you have to have somebody coming around with a stick and beating people up and saying this is what the price will be. It comes out as a natural price, and in a discussion which was made by the founder of our system, and that's the system. So therefore, what we have to do is what is it we don't need? What are we paying for that we don't need in society? Something we could eliminate, and it would make things cost less for most people. Wall Street, for example. Eliminate Wall Street. And any banking system that has not eliminated Wall Street should be eliminated by natural methods. It's not worth paying for. So therefore, the idea is to eliminate Wall Street, and that's what we have to do now. If we want to save the United States, well, the first thing we have to do is eliminate Wall Street. Just plain eliminate it. It doesn't produce anything to feed people, quite the contrary. It's nothing but a bloodsucker on mankind. We don't need that kind of banking. We never did need it. And we're not going to pay for it. Because we're going to have a policy which is based on, there are components of productivity, which we know as human beings, as a society, we know these things interact and are interdependent. We want those interdependent things to improve, to grow, to improve. And that's our system. That's the system of Alexander Hamilton. If you recall that when the Constitution was being implemented and they tried to turn the Constitution into a system, that was exactly what was done. And the papers there are all there still. The recipes are all there. There's no mystery about this. Alexander Hamilton understood the whole thing. And he laid it out, and that's what works. What the problem was, Europeans were largely tied in heavily into oligarchical systems. And these oligarchical systems, which are predatory in nature, instinctively predatory in nature, created a situation where we in the United States, in the Americas earlier and in the United States, were faced with a European system which was rotten, wildly wasteful, overpriced, everything. We could do cheaper. Our production, during the Civil War, for example, our growth in agriculture and other things during the course of the Civil War produced one of the greatest and fastest increases in productivity and development in the United States that the world had ever seen. And we've done that a couple of times also. Under Roosevelt, for example, the way Roosevelt dealt with the problem worked in a similar way. It wasn't spelled out the way I've spelled it out exactly, but most of the people who were doing that, like Wallace and so forth, understood exactly what this is. Mankind's source of income is producing the kinds of things that make him more productive. That's a very simple concept, which the Europeans tend not to have. The Europeans have been influenced by progress in that direction, often, different parts of the world. But we in the United States were unique in this respect. And what happened with the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the time before the Dutch crushed it was the same similar kind of thing. This has spilled over into Europe. We have whole parts of Europe which have been influenced by the American sources, but by the similar kinds of things which have developed in other ways inside Europe. So this is our system. This is the American system, with European and other kinds of cultures which do or try to do the same thing, more or less the same thing. The problem has been that the British interest, people like all kinds of people in the United States who have tried to crush that. The problem is that our people have lost because they're brainwashed. They believe in being brainwashed, and therefore they don't realize how elementary the principle is, at least on this level. The same thing applies on a higher level, but without going into those higher levels of sophistication. That's the situation. If we understand what Alexander Hamilton did to make it possible for the United States economy to actually work, and we simply get into that insight, it has nothing to do with how you deal with money. You try to find a natural idea of the use of money, exactly as Alexander Hamilton spelled out in his papers, his published papers. It's all there. And it's natural in the sense that the relations of production, or the interrelations of production and progress, dictate that. It's the only way to do things. But the problem is we're dealing with a Europe which is dominated, since the Roman Empire in particular, by the British Empire or the Anglo-Dutch Empire. There's no really British Empire, there's an Anglo-Dutch Empire. The damn Dutch got moved in the 17th century and moved in to start to create this process under them. And that was what destroyed France in wars, destroyed other parts of Europe. So this imperial system, which is based on the Roman Empire and similar kinds of earlier formations, became the dominant force in Europe. And that's what the issue is. So there's nothing wrong with the economy, except most people don't know that it's really there.
So I want to come back to perhaps one of the most prominent British operatives in the United States right now, Barack Obama, who's losing his ability, as you said earlier on, to actually influence things behind the scenes, especially as this Snowden case keeps rolling along, so to speak. One thing that we've had in terms of internationally is that on July 2nd, the president of Bolivia was leaving Moscow, heading back to Bolivia, and because it was believed that there was a possibility that Snowden might be on his plane, he was not allowed to enter Italian, French, or Portuguese airspace. And then because you can't get to Moscow, to South America in one shot, you have to refuel. They made an emergency landing in Vienna, where then they were stranded for 14 hours. Now, in a press conference on the ground there, Morales said that the United States and almost all European countries have intelligence services. And this person, Snowden, is not a suitcase or a fly that I can stash in an airplane and take him with me to Bolivia. This is a pretext to threaten, to intimidate, a pretext to silence us in our fight against the economic policies of looting, of domination and intervention. I am not a criminal. And now you've had continued blowback in South America on what happened there on the 2nd. The ambassador to the UN from Bolivia called this an act of aggression, said that, rightly, that the delegation and the president's lives were in danger. There's a violation of the rules of international law. The president of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, in a tweet said, definitely they are all insane. A head of state and his plane have total immunity. This degree of impunity cannot be allowed. Rafael Correa, who's the president of Ecuador, said that we are all Bolivia. These are decisive hours for UNASUR, and UNASUR is the Association of South American Nations. And he said, either we graduate from being colonies or vindicate our independence, sovereignty, and dignity. And there was an emergency session of UNASUR, which was convened. I don't have the details on what has come out of that. But this has created huge blowback on the international stage to Barack Obama. And you can add to that that there was a microphone found in the office of the ambassador of Ecuador in London this past June 16th. So these things just keep piling up on the international side of things. There are also things here in the United States, but if you could give some insights into this continuing process.
Well, it's something that the United States really has to deal with. And the problem, as everyone knows, is centered in Obama. Obama is the problem. Otherwise, there's not a problem. Now, what's happened, of course, is that the United States has done things which are really stupid. And some young people who are not really stupid have looked at these things. Some of them have become quite skilled at certain things. And they became part of the services, the intelligence services of the United States. And they had certain special kinds of skills, and they worked cheaply relative to other people doing the same kind of work. And so they became a significant factor in the economy of the United States. So you have this large number of young people who have come through this process where they have high skills and they have been used. Since they have been used, the techniques they have used are known. And they were encouraged to develop these techniques because they were sort of, nuts of a certain type, a special kind of nut. And therefore they had a certain kind of skill that they developed, which is otherwise is not developed in that particular form. And so you have a whole array of people with this special category of skills, which are related, among other things, to the work of the intelligence services. And since they work cheaply, all the more. So now they turn around and say, well, we're doing this work. Now we're a little bit frank, creaky the way we are, but we're creaky as we are, we can do things. And we can do this. We're good at intelligence work. We're good at handling the gambling aspect of intelligence work, like statistical kind of stuff. And so they turn around and they say, hey, the people of the United States, we're seeing day by day what the government is doing to the people of the United States. We're creating a system which we are guilty of collaborating in swindling the majority of the people of the United States. And on this basis, this one, Snowden, among others of this type, have in unknown quantities of their large population, relatively speaking, have been mustering this skill and saying, we know that our government and our people are being cheated by evil thieves, of which Obama is the leading case. So, leading case Obama, we're going to bring him down to his knees because we're saying this has to stop. This lying and cheating has to stop. And so they have a system, which they've talked about. I haven't seen the details of the system, but I pick up all these little factors in there. And you have a number of people who have ganged together. They have not given their identities to the public, but they have this set of skills, this skill set, so-called. And they're using the skill set to create a crisis for the President of the United States, who they consider the criminal that has to be ousted. Now, they're not there to steal anything, to do anything of that sort to the United States government. They want to be rid of the current President of the United States, and every decent member of the United States society wants these guys ousted too, wants this guy out him. Obama's got to go. He's got to be thrown out of office. And the only thing that keeps him there, Obama has no real skills. The man is not intelligent. He's a freak, not an intelligent person. And thus, he has this role he's played, but he's only a freak for some jerks in Chicago and for the Queen of England. That's all he is. He has no real skills of any significance. You wouldn't vote for him if you knew what he was. Huh? You wouldn't want him around. You would know he's a crook. He's a drug pusher. That's how he got elected president, by being a drug pusher. It was one of his British skills. So anyway, the point is, it's come to the point that the issue here is Snowden and company by themselves are not trying to make a revolution. They don't have that particular kind of ability at this time. What they're trying to do is create a process of embarrassing this crooked president we have, which they know is a damn crook and a liar, They also know that George W. Bush, he's now less able to move around, shall we say, and his silly son, who's a nasty little creature, are impediments. And therefore, let's get rid of this bunch of hoodlums associated with what the Bushes and Obama, and let's go back and throw them out of office, because all the evidence requires that they should be thrown out of office. And just have a little cleanup. And the way to do it is very simply. The first thing we have to do, we got to flank this thing. And the flank we can pull is, guess what? Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall, which as designed very carefully by Franklin Roosevelt and applied by him, restored now, would mean that all of this make-believe money, the so-called Wall Street money and similar kinds of money, are obligations which no one has tried to pay. So therefore, if you simply said, well, you've got all this debt here you've listed, you've got all these obligations you've listed, you've never paid these off. When are you going to pay off these debts which were never really secured? What if we demand that you come to grips with reality? We want to know, what did you really get in payment as earned, yours, net? And what did you not pay? Well, let's say the time has come, after all these years, that the time has come to get this debt paid off. Well, how will we do that? Well, we're never going to be able to pay it off, because these clowns will never be able to pay it off. But we look at them, and if what they are unable to pay in a suitable time, a reasonable time, if they don't pay it and can't pay it, we're going to say you've got to cancel it. Now, we're not going to do bail-ins or bail-outs. We're going to cancel the worthless debt of the speculators. Because if they cannot pay up their obligations, public obligations, in a reasonable period of time, we have to say they have defaulted on their debts. Now, if we put in Glass-Steagall, the immediate question of the election of Glass-Steagall is, what do we do about these, what should be considered long-term debts, unpayable debts? We demand that they become honest. If you're claiming that you owe something, which is merely a claim, and you have nothing to back it up, and time has passed, and you still haven't paid it off, we're going to cut your assets, because you have not performed. You're not allowed to run a racket here like that. This is your racket. You can't run that kind of racket. What are you going to pay? How much? When did you ever pay any of this stuff? Oh, you swap it back and forth, huh? Well, that's nothing. Well, we want to know the net result. How much have you actually paid on the debts which you claim you have? Not? What do we do with the debts? Well, if they're over the limit, you cancel them. You just have to cancel them. You've got to keep the system clean. You can't have fake money running through the system. That's hyperinflationary. So you tell them how much, here's a percentile. We want to know the age of your unpaid debts. We want to know the net amount of those unpaid debts. We will now go into law and decide what are the ways in reducing these unworthy debts. And once we've decided on that, we're going to do it. In the meantime, if we put Glass-Steagall into place, I know exactly how to deal with this situation. There's no problem. We've discussed it. We just go and get a credit system, which is what Glass-Steagall is. Now, if we understand the credit system, and Glass-Steagall embodies the credit system, except most people don't understand how that works. There are bankers who do understand how that will work. The reason it doesn't work now is because this other system, the completely different system, which is nothing but a swindle, got in. Now this has a history. There was a history in the United States in which we began to introduce gambling in various kinds of club schemes and so forth. We introduced this as a way of people getting money, gambling. So we opened up all these kinds of casinos in Indian reservations and elsewhere all over the place, and we had this gambling racket. Now, what happens if we say the gambling racket, it has to be canceled? Why? Because it has no correspondence to the principles of our economy. Gambling, it does not belong in our economy. You shut down the gambling. Huh? You're going to let people play games, innocent games they want to. But the idea of the United States economy being a system based on gambling, that must be stopped. So therefore, all we have to do is pass Glass-Steagall and implement it. Now, we will find out that what's left in the banking system, which is not this crapshoot business, is very limited. And we're going to have trouble finding the resources to build up the productive economy to make up for this change. So therefore, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add to the system something which we've done before, a credit system. In other words, the federal government must create a credit system for which it is responsible and authoritative, which means that we have the federal banking system, a banking system that functions on that basis. So in addition to what the banks have as reserves, which they are investable reserves, or credit in that form, we have to create a new source of credit. Now this can be done very simply by authorizing the federal government in the proper mode to create a reserve. Let's say $70 trillion, a reasonable amount, not this fantastic stuff that we're talking about overseas. Right? In that case, then we were going to take this credit, which the federal government has managed and is allowed to authorize it by getting people who are experienced bankers, and real bankers, not this crap, in order to get investments. For example, we have in the western states, from the Mississippi west, we have the greatest catastrophe in food growing that the United States has known in all recent years. What are we going to do? We're going to fix the water system by engineering investments. We're going to do similar things in that direction. So we're going to create things that cause an increase in the productive potential per capita of the population. We're going to entrust reasonable institutions in banking, including a federal banking credit system, to use this credit so that we're balancing. We're not going to just go out and throw money all over the place without considering where it's going and how it's going to work. And we have to get this. So we have to take the western states, for example. We have to take a state like Tennessee, which is a wreckage state. We had a great system in Tennessee. It was wrecked, destroyed. Got to fix it. So we go to places where we can fix things by regrowing, and you have the labor force, the potential. Then you open up the machine tool design functions to match these projects. And what I've said now is sort of enough to lay it out. That's it. So once we do Glass-Steagall, then the federal government, which is the only institution that the entire population could trust, and the federal government will now be responsible for managing the banking system, that is regulating it, keeping it from corruption and things of that sort, and also helping to provide credit which we put through that banking system based on federal backing. And that could be 70 billion or 100 billion or whatever in terms of amount to start. So whenever we find that we can invest federal credit in things which are actually productive, we'll do it. Just make sure people know what they're doing. And we have areas of the United States which are in destitution. The food supplies of the United States, particularly on terms of the Western Plains terrible. California, which used to be rich, is now destitute in terms of food production. So therefore, we have some very clear things laid on the table, and we're going to find that we have a problem with priorities. Not priorities that we are willing to back, but the fact that we can't handle all the needs now, which we know we're going to have to face up to. So we're going to have to figure out how to set priorities which will enable us to reenact the real principles of growth of the U.S. economy. And if we take that point of view and understand why we have to go to Glass-Steagall absolutely, with no variations, Glass-Steagall absolutely. Because once we put in Glass-Steagall and at the same time act to clean up this worthless mess of useless debts on a gambling system, we have now control of the economy, the U.S. economy. We haven't got control of much. But once we bring things into order, and once the people of the United States have begun to see that we're doing this, then we can rebuild this economy. It's going to be tough. There are going to be lots of failures, but we can do it. The alternative is if we don't do it, the United States as a nation will not survive.
Well, on that note, I will remind people that Congress is coming back to Washington, D.C. for the remainder of July. And so we have our opportunity to carry out, I think, the marching orders that have just been delivered. So I will bring a conclusion to this webcast now. I'd like to thank Leandra and Dennis. I'd like to thank Mr. LaRouche, and I would like to thank all of you viewing. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.